All right, here we are. This is episode 11 of A Lesson Before Writing. We're bearing down on a year of recording our podcast, which is pretty cool. I'm Ted Morrissey, and I'm here with my co hosts, Brady Harrison and Grant Tracy. Just very quickly, to give ourselves a bit of a plug, this is Brady's book, The Term Between, winner of the High Plains Book Award, out in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle editions. We've got Brady's novel, A Journey to Al Ramel, in the works. And so look for that later this year. And Grant Tracy, his most recent release by us is Neon Kiss. This is the paperback edition, which includes not only Grant's great introduction that he wrote for the hardcover edition, but it also includes a preview of the next Hayden Fuller novel, A Shoeshine Kill. And big news is we've just recently released a Neon Kiss for Kindle, just within the last week or so. So if you're an e-reader and you want to read Grant's Neon Kiss, check that out. The Kindle edition is the same as the paperback in terms of having both the introduction and the preview of A Shoeshine Kill. So last episode, we were a bit crunched for time, and so I didn't bring up something I meant to bring up or wanted to bring up, and that was kind of recent acceptances, etc. I'm sorry, I shouldn't shortchange myself. My new book is The Strophes of Job, and it's been getting some really nice reviews, which I appreciate. But anyway, Grant, you had some publications recently. I think some flash fiction as well as some other stuff. Do you want to shout out a bit about those publications and the places that took them?
Yeah, sure. Femme Fatale Flash is a collection of flash pieces, and for that, I basically took a story that had been kicking around. I hadn't been able to place, and I cut it in half. Got it to under 1,500 words and submitted it, and they took it. So that was pretty cool. And then Freedom Fiction Journal took another piece of mine, this town called Winsome, which I've been one of my favorite stories, and I've come close to a couple places like, Alfred Hitchcock and places like that. And it was like, I believe in this story. I got to get it out. So I sent it, and they snapped it right up. So that was pretty exciting. And so I just keep working at it, keep plugging away.
Right. Well, I had mentioned in an earlier podcast that I'd kind of gone a while without submitting anything, but then maybe within the last 2 or 3 months, I kind of got back into the groove in that regard. And I don't even think I've mentioned it during a podcast, but I spent about a year trying to write this speculative fiction novel. I'm not normally a sci-fi writer kind of guy. In fact, almost all of my books are historically set. The Strophes of Job is set specifically in 1907. But I wanted to give this spec fic novel thing, this dystopian novel thing, a try. I love that kind of writing. Some of my favorite books are in that mode. And so again, I spent like a year working on it. I set it in this dystopic, futuristic Chicago, which is one of my favorite settings of my novel. The Artist Spoke is set in Chicago. Anyway, I worked on it for a year, and I liked like some of the stuff, but yet I didn't really kind of figure out where it was going. I'll tell you what, it is so hard to world build pretty much from scratch. It really increased my respect for authors who can do that, because being a historical fiction guy, I may not know, like in 1830 London, how much it costs to rent a hansom cab, but I can figure it out in a matter of minutes, with some research. But when you're trying to figure it all out and make sure everything is logically, anyway, I wasn't sure where it was going, so I just kind of set it aside. But I hated to spend a year without anything to show for it, so I was able to carve out these two little, I guess, short stories that some pieces that have kind of a narrative pulse. And started sending them around, and they've been getting, pretty much rejected right and left. But this little magazine, Caustic Frolic, accepted a piece which I call Riotville, which is like a 3,000 word, 3,500 word story, something like that. And it's supposed to be coming out any day now. So I want to shout out to the
Yeah.
caustic frolic folks. But I've never done that before, taken just a bunch of stuff and kind of whittled it down to a couple of pieces that started sending it around. Brady, let me kick it over to you. I know you've been really up to your earlobes in academic writing. Have you had a chance to get much of your new fiction out, or do you have anything in the hopper to go out?
No. So,
Okay, all right, moving on.
Well, I was saying, I was gonna,
no.
I
So,
love it, man. Honesty.
uh,
No, I was just gonna say, I got another Hayden Fuller novel finished over the spring term called Artifacts. Um, and there was something interesting I did. I kind of reverse engineered a couple, like I took like three short stories that I haven't been able to place anywhere, and I put them in the novel, but they're told to Hayden by other people. So I got to do that cool thing we talked about last broadcast where it's like Hayden telling their story, which is told in first person, but it's filtered through him. And then you got me, the writer behind. So it's like these three layers of the original person, Eddie Sands, who's in a series of other stories of mine. They team up together in this novel. And Eddie's telling the story to Hayden, who is telling it to us. And I'm using free and direct discourse. I feel again along two different bandwidths, if that makes sense. It's kind of wild and kind of cool, and it kind of gave birth to or life to a couple stories: The Hanging Tree, A Cap for Tom, which I stole the title from Morley Callahan, A Cap for Steve, but hey, he's one of my favorite writers. A Cap for Tom, and one other one I can't remember, but I took three stories and then filtered them in this weird way as a, I don't know what I'd call it, but it was an experiment, and I'm really happy about it.
Well, that
so,
reminds me, Ray Bradbury had done a similar thing with Fahrenheit 451. He took three earlier short stories that he had published and used those as kind of the building blocks for what became that classic novel, Fahrenheit 451. But Brady, did we cut you off after your abbreviated response to my question, or did you have more to say there?
yeah, no. Uh, in my defense, I am working around the clock, just just on. So these days, a good buddy and I, Barry Falk, whom Grant knows,
Yeah.
we're editing a collection on Bob Dylan. It's called Teaching Bob Dylan: Multitudes, and so that's in final production stages. And so, to all you aspiring scholars and writers, almost everything takes more time than you think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything takes longer. And then yeah, I've been working on some short stories and started a thing I'm thinking of as a novella, but we'll see. One of the things we might talk about someday is, like, I have more ideas than I have time. And then how do you choose? But I want to set that aside. I want to go back to Grant. And so, Grant, now that I'm curious about your process. Once you finish a draft of a long piece, Stephen King says he puts it in a drawer, which is hard to imagine, like that the speed at which that guy writes, that anything sits quietly for a while. But his process is to let it sit and then go back to it and think about what he's done. Not in his serious alcoholic days or his drug abuse days. Those books he claims not to remember writing, although those are some of his best books, and some of his stinkiest too. Yeah. So what happens now, Grant? You've got the. I mean, you're sort of a novel ahead of yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
You nailed it. It's in a drawer. I haven't looked at it. I mean, it's gone through several revisions. I'm a fast composer, but it's like, it's been revised, but I got my daughter looking at it, who, as you guys know, is a writer, and she'll get back to me. It'll be a cooling off period. Then I'll go back but I really like this one. Like, I think the last line is killer. My whole thing is like Mickey Spillane. I want to grab the reader in the last scene and have something really like shocking or memorable happening. I mean, Stephen King does. I just read Holly by Stephen King, and like, wow. And we'll talk about that when we talk about audience, because there's some things in there that made me think I do similar things as a writer. But yeah, I mean, that's all I can say is that you got a cooling off period, but I'm as it cools, I am heating up with excitement about it. So it's what I would say. I'm really happy about this one. I don't know. I know we've talked about this before, Brady, but I kind of know when something I've written is good. That's there were a couple novels I never shared with Ted, a couple of Hayden novels I just thought were stinko, and they just,
What?
yeah, they just didn't go. I thought they sucked, and I couldn't get the timeline right. I was trying, and so I cannibalized one into the short story, Shot Reverse Shot. That was originally a full-length novel with two different timelines, and it was out of control, and it wasn't up to what I thought of my standards. So that just got shelved. And then Day of the Dragons, which became a novella, was originally a full-blown novel, but I felt like I was puffing it up to get to 60,000 words. But it all came with that cooling off period, putting it in a drawer and then coming back and saying no. But Artifacts, as time's gone on, it's one of my favorite novels that I've written so far.
It's interesting you talked about kind of judgments as to whether something is good or not. I mentioned that piece is getting published, any day now, and I set that whole project aside, quite unsure whether it was worth, even sending out. But I'd spent a whole year on it, so I like I said, I found these couple of pieces, so I'd sent them out. Rejection, rejection, rejection. And meanwhile, I complete reverse course. I've mentioned that the thing I've mainly been working on is this sequel to a novel called Untimely Frost, which is focused now on this Edgar Allan Poe inspired character, is set in like 1850 London. So I went from like futuristic dystopian Chicago to 1850s London, overnight, literally. And I've been working on that for months, and I've been feeling pretty good about it. Well, anyway, I get this acceptance finally about this little story called Riotville from my dystopian efforts. And so I reread it. Like as soon as I got the acceptance and told the editor, yeah, you bet, no problem publishing it. I went and pulled up the story and read it, this is actually kind of good. And all it took was one other person in the world saying that they liked it for me to completely reevaluate and how I felt about it. And again, it's just that, I think it's that writerly ego. I mean, as long as I've been doing this and as many pub credits as I've had, et cetera, everything you write, there's a little bit of you don't feel quite validated until somebody else out there, gives it the thumbs up or something. Brady, have you had that experience? I know you've talked about how some pieces that you thought were terrific, it wound up being more difficult to place than you anticipated, and some pieces that you were just sort of mildly pleased with get taken immediately. That sort of phenomenon.
Yeah, no, that has certainly been the case. And so unlike Grant, I feel like I'm no judge of my own work. And I wonder, if it's a matter of sort of individual personality or psychology or character, because I think no matter what I'm working on, I feel like I'm just starting. Like I don't have any credentials. I don't have any standing. I don't have any claim on anybody's attention or that they should be interested in what I have to say. And so even though after all these years, of course, we're quite all young, but after all these years and all these projects, 10 books and counting, I still feel like still in so many ways in all endeavors, just a kind of novice, sending out stuff. I have a couple short stories out there circulating, looking for good homes, and I don't know if they're any good. I like them, but whether anybody else. But it is true what Ted says too, that every once in a while you do need a pat on the back.
Oh yeah,
it's hard to keep going.
Yeah, it was one of the things in Holly, that the mentor that's mentoring Barbara, a poet, and I've heard this from, and that's one of the things I like about the novel. It has this meta component. It's about writing in some ways. Says you write for the work. It's not about the fame. It's not about and that's all well and good. I agree with that. I mean, when I write a story, I'm writing for the story, and there's rules the story has, and I want to stay within whatever those rules are and make it work. The story announces itself and it has a certain, I don't know, built-in structure, rules, whatever. But and I'm not searching for fame, but I need validation. Yeah, absolutely. You work for the work, but I want to get the work out in the world too, I mean, so that's sort of a romantic idea, like you work for the work, and I agree with that. It's about the work and making it the best it can be, but I still want people to read it, and I still want people to say, "Hey, that was entertaining. That was a well-written detective story. I mean, you're a good, your plots are awesome. I mean, yeah, that's important to me." So I don't know. Maybe that's a weakness. I don't know, but I crave validation. I just need it. I crave it.
Well, one of the things I talk to my students about, particularly my MFA students, is just trying to, I guess there's a fine line between discouragement and giving them a sense of what probably being a writer is going to be like for them going forward. Is that just because you get a piece rejected, maybe rejected 10 times or 20 times, I think it'd be very easy for someone who's just starting to kind of get into the biz to think, oh, okay, well, 10 editors have rejected it. There must be something inherently wrong with it. I'm going to revise it. I'm going to, or I'm going to stop sending it out because it must really suck. But that's nothing. I mean, 10 rejections, 30 rejections, 50 rejections. I mean, if you look at it and you still like it and you still believe in it, just keep sending it out there. I went a number of years where I wasn't really sending anything out. I was working on my doctorate, which was not in creative writing. And so I was just completely immersed in all this academic, research and writing it took me like 7 years to get my PhD doing it part-time. So for a lot of that time, I wasn't writing, but I also wasn't sending stuff out. But then I finally decided, like, you know what? I need to go. I've got all these stories I've written, which I've stopped sending out. So I developed this like mathematical formula. I would send out stories, but every time I got one rejected, I would immediately, within 24 hours, send it to 6 other journals. And then again, when that one of those, and so I don't know, I had a bunch of stuff out, but I also then got a lot of stuff accepted. I remember the first AWP I went to in Chicago. This was probably 2009, something like that. We were in the big hall where all the literary journals and publishers have their tables set up. And I thought, oh, I've got a story in that one, and I've got a story in that one, and I've got literally like 7 or 8 of those tables in that hall had journals sitting on them where I had stories in them because I had just, I just flooded the market basically with my stories, and lo and behold, they got picked up. And I'm not trying to pump myself up here as a great writer, but more about the importance of persistence and just not accepting, well, half a dozen rejections must mean the story really stinks. As we've talked about before, there's just so many reasons why a story might get rejected. So if you believe in it, you just got to keep sending it out. But I think that little formula I came up with for every rejection, send it out 6 more times, really did a lot to boost certainly my publishing credit list, but also my confidence and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk from the other side, from a teaching side. My whole goal as a teacher is to give students confidence, to believe, to take themselves seriously and believe in their work and send it out. And I am not a teacher, and it's one of the things I really admire about your editorial and Ted, is I do not grab the steering wheel. I let the student drive the car. And I've had teachers that, and there's this great moment in again, coming back to Holly, but this fits in, where one teacher tells the poet to cut 2 words to make 1 word, and says it's more, and then the poet, who's a really good poet, tells the young poet, "Why'd you do that?" And she doesn't want to confess it was because his other mentor, well, maybe mentor, told her to cut 2 words to 1 word, and she says it screws up the whole rhythm. Stay with what you had, and that's kind of you got a heartbeat rhythm going here, and now you've messed it up. And I kind of trust people's instincts, and I want to work with them to realize the story that they have in them, not to write a Grant Tracy story. And I just, sometimes I feel there's a lot of editors out there, not a lot, but some heavy-handed ones. And that's just not how I roll. I just don't think that's the way to create art and create writers that have self-confidence, because they're always looking for that editor that they need to tell them what's wrong with their work. So their work ends up never being good enough. But if you can give the student confidence to see that their work's good enough and that they have things within the work they can build on and use to make it better, they're going to be able to be self-sufficient as writers going forward and not necessarily need the workshop anymore. That's sort of my philosophy of teaching, I guess.
Well, I'm just real quickly, Brady, then I'll get you in on this. Something that's happened to me a couple of times, and I find it really, I don't know, hard to deal with as a writer, but also a little bit on the unethical side is, and again, luckily it's only happened a couple of times, and this, over years and years of sending stuff out, getting them accepted. But a couple of times I've had it happen where a journal will send me an acceptance, say, hey, we want to publish this story. And of course, you're over the moon. It's like, great, that's fantastic. So then you quickly withdraw it from all the other places where it may be under consideration. And then in a couple of instances, like 6 months later, 8 months later, I get an email from another editor at the journal, somebody higher up the editorial food chain, who wants all these changes in the story. And it's like, wait a second. You accepted it, 6 months ago without any word that there may be editorial. I'm okay with, a couple words here and there, maybe this word for that. And in one case, it was really, I think, bad editing, because the notes were like, this paragraph isn't working, revise it. Or I don't like this word here. What so I'm not going to. So anyway, what, in that case, we went back and forth. But my thing is, if a journal accepts a piece, what they're telling you is they're accepting it essentially as you sent it to them. And if they read it and they think, well, there's this kind of weak paragraph, or maybe the ending isn't quite right, they should, put that as part of the kind of provisional acceptance and say, hey, we really love this, but, we got a couple of questions about it. And if you're okay with that. When Glimmer Train published one of my stories, it was kind of provisional at first. The editor said, we really like it, but we think you maybe use the character's name too much. Maybe you switch out for some pronouns a couple times. Yeah, no problem. And Grant, the last story of mine that you guys generously published, Chaldea, I don't know if you edited or Jeremy or who it was, but came back and then just a couple of things, like, for example, I think I had the word invalid in the story, and I guess you guys have adopted a policy where you don't use words like cripple and invalid, which I totally respect. So yeah, that made perfect sense. I didn't have a problem with that. But this idea, it's almost like a bait and switch. Here, I'm accepting your story, but then 6 months later, you hear from another editor who, for whatever reason, has lots of issues with it. So have you guys run into that at all, or what are some of your thoughts? Brady, you haven't talked for a while. Let me drag you into the conversation here. Have you had that happen, or do you have any thoughts on that sort of thing happening to writers?
Yeah, no, not in creative writing, not in submitting stories, in academic publishing and journals. I mean, it's brutal. You get reader reports, and so you can be rejected, you can be accepted, pending revisions, provisionally, you can be accepted. I mean, I can't think of only 1 or 2 times where I've submitted an article and it's been accepted as is. And you get these reader reports, and there's a lot, I find, in academic reader reports, there's a lot of, if I were writing this article, this is what it would look like.
Oh, God.
Which is not the article I wanted to write. But in this matter of getting stories rejected, I have a story circulating now that I like really well, but it's been rejected a few times, and it gave me pause. And so talking with you guys has given me some more confidence, because when I was conceiving of the story, I saw 2 different endings, and so I went with one of them, and I think it's the right ending. But since it's been rejected a few times, I've been second guessing myself. Was it the other ending? And so I sat down and wrote that other version so I could compare them. And now I can't decide. But the matter of rejection, going back to what Grant said, there is a psychology. It does even after all this time and all the things that we have, all the work that we have done, it still enters the mind. Yeah. But I can't imagine. I mean, of course, if the New Yorker calls, maybe you'll agree to substantial revisions. But I think with fiction, you gotta go with your gut and your sense. And I like the way that Grant talks about it. And a lot of writers talk about it. The story tells itself in a way. We're just the people that hit the keyboard. When stories have their own logic, things attach, and so you have to be true to that. I think. Yeah, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, Grant, what's your editorial posture on that bait and switch that I've
I hate
experienced a
it.
couple times?
I think it's totally wrong. I wouldn't go so far as to say unethical, but I might on a different day. I think you're absolutely right, Ted. It should be up front. Hey, we have a few reservations. These are some of our thoughts. If you're willing to, make some changes, we would like to publish it. Just come out and say that, And I think there in all the time I've been an editor, and it's been since 2000, I think there might have been 2 stories where I did that. And it was because I was a younger writer getting started, and it was it needed some work, but I wanted to take the risk and publish this writer. So rather than just reject it outright, I thought it was worth asking up front for some changes. And the writers, they were excited and they made changes, and the work appeared in the magazine. But my feeling is, if I like it, I like it, and I'm not going to grab the steering wheel, but like I said, there were probably 2 cases where I knew it wasn't quite ready yet, but I thought maybe with just a few nudges, not telling them what to write, but here's a troubling area, here's some thoughts, here's some things you had earlier in the story you maybe can come back to and use here. It's up to you, blah, blah, blah. The stories were pretty good. So it was worth it, and it was sort of, in both cases, sort of underrepresented writers, people of color, or one was an immigrant, like from Bosnia or something. So yeah, so I was willing to go a little bit of an extra mile to get those representations in the magazine. But
Well, if I were at home broadcasting, I'm on a remote location, I would at this point to the picture of William Gass, which normally would be here over my shoulder, and say that my idol William Gass said that to be edited was to be rejected. That, when he sent stuff out, he had spent a lot of time working on it, and that's what he wanted published. And if someone had issues with this, that, or the other, just don't publish the damn thing. He would rather be unpublished. In fact, he went years without being published. It took him a decade to get his novella, now classic novella, The Peterson Kid, into print. And those were the days when you would send it out, manuscript. They literally would send the same manuscript back to you if they were rejecting it. And he writes about how that would just like land with a thud, on his doorstep, time and again. And he would always just be livid with anger that it had been rejected again. But he was absolutely, convinced that the story was as it should be, and eventually he would find someone who appreciated it, and he eventually did. This guy called John Gardner, who contacted him from afar because he was starting a brand new journal, and had heard via the grapevine that this guy named William Gass, who he'd never met, had this really cool story, but it kept getting rejected. And so, and actually Gass got 2 acceptances almost simultaneously. So after a decade of rejection, Gardner and then another editor at another journal both accepted it practically simultaneously. And he ended up going with the Gardner, I think maybe because it arrived like a day earlier or something. But anyway, to be edited is to be rejected. So, hey, we wanted to talk about who we write for. And this maybe is a good segue to that. Yeah, Brady's
just a second. Yeah, we got to go back. Now, you're referring to this William Gass? I've never heard you speak of this guy before.
Well, right. Yeah. I'm usually pretty shy about it. But hey, by the way, I'm going to be in Chicago later this week at the American Literature Association conference and doing a paper on what I think is William Gass's greatest work, which is not the work that most people would probably say. And we're doing a William H. Gass at 100 panel at the Chicago conference. So I'm really looking forward to that. But yeah, I got to quote some Gass. Got to get that in there. You guys got to talk about hockey. I got to talk about Gass. Too bad Gass didn't play hockey. Then we could combine our interests somehow,
That's fair.
But anyway, we last time we thought about maybe we were going to talk about who we write for, who our audience is when we write. And in fact, Brady carved out time in his extraordinarily busy schedule, and I'm not even being sarcastic, to prep for that conversation, and then we never got around to it. So let's get into it here, Brady. I'm going to turn it over to you since you spent time, valuable time getting ready last time, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it. What's your sense of who you write for, who we write for when we're writing fictions, especially?
Yeah, no, so I think this is great, and I think it connects. I think it connects very well to the conversations we've just been having. Like, who is going to be interested in our work? How do we imagine the folks that we're writing? What kind of audience do we have in mind? Who are they? And so, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this because I took the time, did some prep, and looked back at a collection of scholarly essays on short story writers that both Grant and I and Karen contributed to. And so it's probably mysterious in a certain way because we sit in our spaces. If you write in a coffee shop or you write in your office, wherever you write, it's a solitary enterprise. But we're trying, as Grant said earlier, to reach out to folks. If you're going to put the work in, and part of what compels us is that we think we have something to say, that we want to say it. We want to have a conversation with folks. And so the problem of who is the audience. And so when I think about it, I sort of think like, sort of an interested person with some education that likes some degree of complexity in their stories. That's the kind of way I sort of generally think about who someone might be that would read my work, that might be interested in my work. But getting back to the scholarly collection that Grant and I contributed to, I wrote on Tim O'Brien. And I read in an interview one time with Tim O'Brien that he had a list of 10 actual people that he would think of. And like, one was the mechanic in Des Moines, and one was the florist in somewhere else. And someone else on that list might have been his father or his mother or his buddy. And so he tried to, he said in this interview, and Tim O'Brien's pretty slippery, so I wouldn't, I don't trust anybody. Tim O'Brien, perhaps, he's pretty slippery kind of guy. But that list of 10 actual folks, how would I make something interesting to those 10 folks? That seems to me really challenging, and I've thought about that a lot since I first read it. Am I trying to reach the mechanic in Des Moines? I do think about what my father would like, what kinds of fiction he read, what kind of books he read. Like, that had a big impact on my imagining telling stories, because he was such a great natural storyteller, and I just love listening to stories about family and about the past and about growing up, and then people that he knew along the way. I loved all those stories. And so I have my dad in mind. And then what might my mom like? What would my buddy like? What could I write that Grant would be interested in? And so taking it from a kind of nebulous, sort of educated kind of person with like some complexity to 10 actual folks. And so I don't have any answers about specifically who I'm writing for, or who would be, or who's actually reading any of my work. But I like that kind of, I've been thinking a lot about that tension between a kind of generalized sense of a reader, hopefulness on my part that someone's going to like it, to this model that O'Brien offered of, here's 10 actual people. How am I going to connect with those people? Okay, I've been nattering way too long. I'll stop.
Wow, that was awesome. I love that. I'm like, wow. Well, how do I follow up on that? I really can't. I guess that was brilliant, Brady. I do know my dad is someone I think about when I write. Because he was a working class guy. He didn't read a whole lot. He read 2 books that I ever saw him read in his lifetime: Mickey Spillane's Side of the Jury, which probably explains part of my Spillane fascination, and the rise and fall of the Third Reich. He was totally obsessed with what might have happened if the Nazis won, and we wouldn't be here. At least, those of us that have certain. I mean, I'm part Gypsy or Roma in terms of my background, so I would have been one of the ones, eliminated. But Brady, you fired an idea in my head, and I guess I would say for me, I would steal your idea and just put it on. I love this cup, by the way. But I would put it on like the writers I admire that I want to be part of that tradition. And I kind of imagine, I guess, like Raymond Chandler, Mickey Spillane, Charles Ardai, Max Allan Collins, Richard Stark, Ed McBain, writers who's Earl Stanley Gardner, writers whose work I've admired for a long time, that I would love to be in that camp or in that, spoken of fondly in the same way. So I see myself writing in that tradition. But the other thing the little monkey wrench I'd throw in here is, and this isn't meant to be disparaging at all, but I also find for some reason women editors dig my stuff. And I don't know what it is about me or about what I'm putting out there, but I have, now that I've been writing crime stuff, it's more half and half, male editors and female editors. But when I was writing literary fiction, almost all the editors who were taking my short stories were women, at least the people I was having correspondence with, and the editors. I remember getting a phone call one time from Passages North, and the editor there, she was so excited about the story I wrote and talked to me on the phone. And so that kind of made me wonder, is there something engendered about what I do? I don't know, but I just wanted to throw that out there. That was sort of an observation I made about my own work as a writer, that women seem to like it, or something. I get comments from women, yeah, I really like your stories. I wish you had more stories about women, but these are really good. And I'm like, well, yeah, I write I write about men for the most part, but I'm glad somehow I'm hitting a chord with you. So that's awesome.
Well, in my books, the female characters are always the smartest, shrewdest, most clever characters in the book, and that's largely because I feel like in real life that's true also. I had to get a new doctor recently because my previous doctor, who was a woman, stepped out of practice for a while, and so I said, well, I'm searching for a new doctor. It's got to be a female, And somebody said, why do you always go to women doctors? I go, look, women. I've been teaching for 40 years now, and I know for a fact that females are better listeners and smarter than guys are. That's what I want in a doctor, And so, my female characters are always like the smartest, shrewdest people in my books or whatever. I released that collection of stories and sonnets last year, and I wrote a pretty lengthy introduction for it, which I've actually now posted at 12 Winters Miscellany. So if anyone wanted to take a look at it, but one thing I talk about in there is my changing perspective on for whom I write. And I talk about the fact that early in my writing, I kind of visualize the idealized reader, someone who, likes a good plot, but maybe wants a little more meat on the bone, than your typical page turning kind of fiction or whatever. But over time, I realized maybe within the last few years that my sense of audience has changed drastically, to recognize that about the only people who I can count on reading my books are paid contest judges and reviewers. And so I said, I feel kind of like those farm kids who lovingly raise a piglet or a lamb or something from infancy for the sole purpose of taking it to the county fair and hopefully winning a blue ribbon. So as I'm writing my books, I'm thinking, okay, what I'm going to do with this mainly is I'm going to send it into these contests and send it into Kirkus Reviews, etc., and hopefully they'll say nice things about it. Because the idea that readers in general are just going to pick it up and read it, I actually here in the library where I've worked for nearly 25 years, and it's an interesting experience to be a writer and a librarian at the same time, because like I always design our books, I think they have some pretty cool covers, and and actually they've won some awards for the cover design. And when we go to when we were in Albuquerque, I know people stopped by the table, they commented how cool the covers were. Nevertheless, I'm not obsessive about it, but it just so happens the circulation desk, there's a direct line of sight to the rack where we put new releases. And actually, Grant, your book is still on our new release rack, and my book is on there. And so, without even thinking about it throughout the day, I'll see people go over to the new books rack, and I'll watch. Will they even pick up my book or Grant's book? And when Brady's book was on that, and 99 times out of 100, they don't even pick it up. They aren't even attracted enough to the cover. We really obsess over the blurbs that we put on books, and what do people say about them. From my perspective, literally, most potential readers don't even pick up the book to read the blurbs, etc. And it's pretty discouraging. And I don't know what to do to get people to even pick up a book. I mean, it would be a win if someone picked it up and read a little bit of it and put it back on the shelf without checking it out, And so it's a very strange kind of bird's eye view to have, like, real readers show their complete lack of interest in our writing.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I'm not saying I'll ever be famous. I really honestly don't care about that. But I do have a feeling that after I'm dead and gone, 60 years from now, some graduate student somewhere is going to put me in a chapter on, Northeast people living in the Midwest writing detective stories or something. There's something about the seductive about the immortality of it. Like I just feel my work's going to be there for like right now. I've been devouring this writer Ralph Dennis. He wrote these crime stories set in Atlanta, and he's from North Carolina, or he went to school in North Carolina, and very Southern kind of influence. And there are these short little pop boilers that are fantastic. There's a black ex-football player and a white ex-cop who's in his 40s and fat. And I'm like, I love this. And it's really, it predates Spencer for Hire, which I'm sure that Robert Parker read these and was influenced by them. And they're fantastic books. But in his lifetime, Ralph Dennis didn't get the attention he should have. And I'm hoping some of these will get made into movies and stuff, because they're real page turners, and they're great plots and interesting characters. The two guys are like buddies, but because the race thing, it's like they can't quite say that they're friends, but they're friends. It's fascinating. They're all set in 74 to 77 in that time period. And so Ralph Dennis, overlooked artist in his time, but hopefully getting a second life. A small press has been republishing the books. Brash Books is the name of the press. And I've read 6 of the books now, and I got 2 more coming from Abe Books, and there's 13 in total. I plan to read them all. I just think it's fantastic. So I don't know if that's any help, but I just feel like if the work's going to be there down the road for someone else, maybe at a library or something, to pick it up if they're not quite getting it right now. It's frustrating that it might not happen in my lifetime, but that's how it rolls.
Yeah. Brady, your thoughts on
Well, one of the things I've been thinking about, and I've thought about this actually quite a bit, and so perhaps it's not productive to spend one's time this way, but it connects back to something that Ted has mentioned on a couple of different occasions, in particular about working at the library. But if you walk into any big chain kind of bookstore, of course, we're fans of independent bookstores, local bookstores. If you walk into a chain bookstore, and Ted has mentioned this in the library, there's a lot of James Patterson books.
Yeah.
And they're James Patterson books with somebody. And so I don't know what the terms are. Does James Patterson come up with an idea and then, hire a gunslinger to write it? Or does the gunslinger come with a book that's James Patterson, like to James Patterson's agent? I don't know how all that works. But when you walk into the bookstore, there's a lot of James Patterson.
Mm-hmm.
Right, there's a lot of James Patterson. There'd be like, shelf after shelf in a bookstore. And then Ted has mentioned also it's true in the library. And those books, Ted, correct me if I'm wrong, they get checked out. And so I've sort of been puzzling about that. And I don't have any insights. But in terms of market share, it's hard to compete with those guys.
Yeah.
Stephen King. I love Stephen King. It's read The Body for the first time. It's different than the movie. And so, yeah, this question of audience, what do folks like? What do they want? How do you establish that relationship with readers? And so, yeah, what's James Patterson's secret?
Well, let me, actually, I can clear up the James Patterson question because I read or saw an interview years ago, and he's actually a Madison Avenue guy. He was an advertising executive before he turned to writing fiction. And so the process, and he's very upfront about it, is he has a stable of writers that he is kind of taught to write like a particular style. As you know, he's got different series. So he has a writer or two he's taught to write, like, for the Alex Cross series, for example, etc. And so he comes up with a plot idea and a rough outline. He gives it to his trained writer, and they start writing the manuscript. Meanwhile, he turns his attention to the advertising campaign. So he starts developing the book cover, the print ads, the internet ads, the TV ads. And so by the time his co-author, or whatever you want to call him, finishes the manuscript, the ad campaign is completely ready to go. And so he'll get the manuscript, and then he further James Pattersonizes it a little bit, tinkers with it a little bit, I guess. But then it is ready to go. So he has this full-scale, multi-million-dollar advertising campaign ready to go the instant the manuscript is ready to be published. And then the other thing that someone like a James Patterson has going for them is that their books are published en masse. I mean, hundreds of thousands of copies, which means that each individual copy costs pennies on the dollar. We publish these books and we have to charge, I think this is $37. Every hardcover edition I sell, the press gets, I don't know, like $3 or something. Everybody else takes a piece of the pie, but the consumer has to pay, almost $40 for this book. And yet we're making, a couple of dollars per book. Whereas somebody pays $25, $30 for a James Patterson novel. I think he's with Hachette. They make, on a $30 purchase, they make $29.50. So because it only takes 50 cents to publish the book. And meanwhile, then you can put them in like Walmart's bargain bin for $5 and still make $4.50 per copy, and so it's just an economics kind of thing. Yeah, I can never, I haven't been able to ever refine the article, but I know because it really sunk in. I read an article, I'm pretty sure it was in the New York Times just a few years ago, that there's about 24 authors who account for about 85% of the book sales in the US. You've got your Stephen Kings, your James Pattersons, your Danielle Steele, your David Baldacci's, and Nora Roberts, etc. And the rest of us are elbowing each other for that last 15% of sales. And there's like 4 million new book titles on average published every year. So it's like, it's just such an odd, the odds are so far against. And by the way, we're in good company because our director, she's really a great director and a great reader. And she gets really great books by great authors as they come out. And they sit there untouched along with our books also. So it's not just us. I mean, it's just that the reading public, by and large, they're very habitual. And I've had it happen where people come in and say, gosh, I haven't liked Stephen King's last 5 novels, but I'll go ahead and read this one, or they'll come in and say, do you have the new, James Patterson or the new, right now Frida McFadden's the big name, and we're like, oh, it's checked out, and they'll say, oh, well, maybe I'll be here next week, and they'll turn around and leave. It's like, we've got a library full of great books, but they want that one author, and if they can't, it's like, I guess you're hungry for a banana split. So if somebody offers you some nachos, it's just not going to do the trick, So anyway, there are just so many factors involved, and it's just such a numbers game. I'll stop talking here just a second. When I've published you guys, I think I've talked to you about the fact, how many people have to read your books to make it worthwhile. And I'm hoping it's not very many, because in my mind, it isn't. And I'm going to say this, it's going to sound kind of egotistical, but just recently, like a week ago, a reader came in who actually had read this book, someone I've known for a couple of decades. And and I was floored by this. They told me for the first time ever that my first novel, Men of Winter, which came out in 2010 by a small little press, it's one of their favorite books, and they reread it every year.
Wow.
What? How is that? And then it's been a couple of years ago, but I had a friend on Facebook send me a link to an article, and it was a librarian somewhere in Northern Illinois, someone I didn't know, never met, I don't believe. And it was like, meet the librarian spotlight kind of interview, and they asked this librarian who their favorite author was. And they said, Ted Morrissey. What? And it was like, and one of the questions was, if you were marooned on a desert island and could only take books by one author with you, me again. And again, I'm not saying this because I'm so egotistical. I'm saying because I was shocked. I mean, so for individual readers, sometimes I guess the books actually get through. And I guess, we've all made differences in individual readers' lives, and that's something we should feel really good about. So maybe we're not chatting with Reese Witherspoon and we're going to fly off to our house in the Hamptons with our neighbor James Patterson next door, for the barbecue or something. But I think our work is meaningful to at least some people, and I think that's something to kind of hang our hat on.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, congratulations, Ted. Sorry, Grant, I'm cutting you off, but I just want to back up for 1 second.
Yeah.
And I say, I accept your kind offer, Ted, of $1 million book launch campaign for A Journey to Al Ramal. So, like a second and third mortgage on your house for a buddy is not too much to ask. So thank you.
And I think it would take 4 mortgages on my house to get there.
And I think there's something to the James Patterson, Stephen King phenomena. And it's something Brady talked about when we were in Albuquerque. We talked about the loss of the canon in Academe. We used to have a common read that we all could talk about. And I think there's something in human beings. That's why the Super Bowl is like such a thing. People don't even like football. Watch the freaking Super Bowl because it's stuff to talk about. And so we become creatures of habit, but it's like, oh, if I read the latest Stephen, I can talk to the auto mechanic, I can talk to the florist, like all those people that Tim O'Brien was mentioning. There'll be some sort of common ground. So I think there's some kind of pull towards that, especially in this postmodern times we live, where everything's so fractured. Just today, I heard that we have 2 theaters in town, not play theaters, but movie theaters. One is closing down on Thursday. Shifting demographics, shifting viewing practices. People stream now. People have home, theater. So the one near my campus, of a College Square Cinema, is closing its doors on Thursday, and I'm like, whoa! But the times I've gone there, it's been a while. I'm just as guilty. I went and saw Oppenheimer there. I think there were like 3 other people in the theater. I mean, times change, things change. But I think there is this is something we can all share, and we can share the new lousy James Patterson book,
Well, I've got one of my favorite patrons, not that I play favorites, but one of my favorite patrons is this woman that comes in regularly. And I think she's a neonatal nurse at this big children's hospital we have in town. And she has like 3 kids of her own, and who are of course in everything, soccer and blah 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 blah. And she's run ragged, and she was checking out the Colleen Hoover, and we were talking about Colleen Hoover, and she was almost like apologetic about it, but she said, I know it's really simple, but I'll tell you what, I get about 20 minutes at the end of my day, before I go to bed, all the professional stuff is done, the kids are, whatever. I got about 20 minutes, and this is about all I can handle, from 9:30 to 10 o'clock before I go to bed or whatever. So yeah, she's not going to be reading, Ulysses or Henry James or something. And she's very upfront about it. She knows it's a simplistic read, but that's what she needs. That's about the only thing she can read at that time of the day. And I think there's a lot of people like that. Their days are just crazy busy, and they're not going to be plodding through Finnegan's Wake, at the end of the day or something.
Yeah. And I think there is a gatekeeping process. Those that are like the NPR crowd, and I don't consider myself one of them, but PBS, that can kill your television, that kind of crowd. They probably read like the New York Review of Books, and they find, Scandinavian noir. There's an article on Scandinavian noir, and suddenly people are gobbling up Henning Mankell and the other guy Nesbo, right? Or hey, this Anthony Doerr guy, and they read. So there is a promotion of a small select group of writers that get privileged to be put in those listings, because I know academics who read fiction, and they seem to read all the stuff that's in that list. That's how they're being, I don't want to say policed, but getting informed. So who are the writers of no? So they don't read Patterson. They don't read, King, although King's kind of crossed over a little bit. They'll read whatever's in there and say, "Oh, have you read this by? Have you read Percival Everett's James, for example?" Because they read it like this awesome review of it. So, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I think that's also limiting in a certain way. Like here's the canon according to New York publishing. This is what you should read. So anyway, that's a little small complaint, but I got to admit, I've looked at that, and it's turned me on to some writers that I wouldn't have known about. So I can see the appeal of it, but there is a way in which we are creating small coteries of folks that are educated within certain circles of the writing population. That's what I'm trying to say.
I know we need to get on to talking about our featured story, but just very quickly, there's this woman I know who, a writer, who when we met, she was a dyed-in-the-wool literary writer and experimentalist, appeared in some really avant-garde literary magazines. Well, she made the conscious decision that she needed to make some money. And so she started writing these kind of popular mysteries, ended up getting a big time New York agent, has, got big time contract, movie deals are in the works. She feels like kind of a sellout because she had to kind of water down, the kind of writing she wanted to do. And I said to her one time, well, if you ever want to scratch that itch, I'd be, delighted to publish, one of your experimental books or something like that. And she's like, oh, no, that's not going to happen. She goes, my agent, my publisher wouldn't allow it because according to her, I'd never heard this, Amazon figures your algorithm on your total lifetime book sales. So if she published under her name, presumably, a little experimental novella from 12 Winters, and it didn't sell as well as her big time mysteries, it would lower her ranking with Amazon, and her books would not appear so high on search lists, etc.
Wow.
And so I always thought it was based per book, that if you had so presumably if we had, one of our books, go viral, it would be weighed down on Amazon because of our other books having not been huge sellers. And that's just one of those mathematical things that I had never even been aware of. And I've been in the publishing biz for years and years and years. So, but I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. So on that happy note, let's turn to our featured story. As our dedicated listeners and viewers know, every episode we have a featured story. And last episode, because things were just a little bit tight time wise, etc., we ended up doing a story that had been published online. But normally, I go to one of the print journals that I get subscriptions to, and so on. And this is a really great print journal story magazine, one of my faves. They've rejected me many times over the years, but I obviously don't hold a grudge. And this is a little bit older. I normally try to get something that's like piping hot, fresh out of the literary oven, but this is actually from fall 2021, issue number 12. But we're going to talk about a story by an author named Richard Mirabella, and we'll give a little more info about Richard here in just a few minutes. But we are going to talk about a story that we've read called The Green Coat. And I'll kind of get us going here on it here in just a second. It's a little bit tricky to talk about because it's a very adult story. And so a lot of the things that happen in it are not a PG-13 kind of thing. So we'll have to kind of use our best judgment in terms of where we go with our discussion. But I think there's just some really interesting things going on in the story, and that's one of the reasons I picked it for us to take a look at. But this is the opening to Richard Mirabella's The Green Coat from issue 12 of Story magazine. Augusto and Paul stood on a front lawn in a cloud of basement odors, searching through old things. They loved a sale. Augusto ran his fingers over the wrinkled spines of horror novels and mysteries, and Paul wanted dishware from his grandmother's heyday, if he could find it. The sun burned Augusto's scalp, but he wouldn't wear a hat no matter how much Paul begged. Quote, "You don't want to admit you're losing your hair," Paul told him. Augusto resembled a little leaguer when he wore a hat. He hated the heat and wanted to evaporate into a mist. On the other hand, Paul came alive in the summer. He wanted to be outside, to be walking, exploring new places. He wanted to have sex more often. To make him happy, Augusto sweated through his shirts and carried a gallon of water wherever they went. Just a bit more here. Augusto spotted the green coat folded on a card table the moment he and Paul stepped out of the car. All right, so that's the beginning paragraph plus a sentence of this story by Richard Mirabella. And just to give a little more info here, so Paul ends up buying the green coat, and in fact, he becomes obsessed with it and wears it constantly, even though, again, it's the height of summer and it's a wool coat, so it's very, very hot. We notice in that opening paragraph, I think the author does a great job of very quickly and efficiently telling us that even though Paul and Augusto have been together, I think maybe we learned it's been 10 years that they've been partners, but even still, they have some very different sorts of personalities, one liking hot weather, one liking not, one liking the indoors, one liking the outdoors, etc. So very quickly we get this sort of binary opposition between them in spite of their love for each other. And so anyway, this green coat, though, this obsessiveness that Paul has with this green coat, refusing to take it off, it starts impacting his relationship with Augusto. It starts impacting his relationships with everyone, including total strangers, as it gets sweatier and sweatier and starts to fall apart, and his own hygiene starts to be affected by this obsession. And then one last point, there across the hall neighbor, a guy named Teddy, who is also gay. He gets figured into this sort of triangular dynamic of these two guys who are partners, but then they're having issues largely because of the green coat. So Teddy kind of gets dragged into that sort of thing. And anyway, that's sort of the basic premise here. I'm going to stop talking to see what Brady and Grant think about the green coat. And Brady, I think I'll kick it over to you, since I think Grant and I have been dominating the episode so far.
I don't feel that way. I've been fascinated by the conversations and observations, and also your experiences. Yeah. So the green coat. I don't have great insights into this story, and so I'm not sure what I can offer, but I can talk a little bit about what kinds of things surround our reading experience. And so lately I've been doing some research on 19th, 18th, 19th century uh, Russian and Ukrainian and Lithuanian storytelling. And so it's been doing this research, it's been on my mind. And so when I read The Green Coat, I thought I was reading one of those folk tales. This man encounters this youngish guy sort of creeping up in age a little bit, and his partner. They're doing the usual things lots of folks like to do, go yard sailing. He finds this coat and they get a deal and they feel pretty great about it. And Paul becomes obsessed with it. It becomes this kind of, not exactly demonic, but there's something folk tale-y about the object that comes into somebody's life and it takes over, and so it has sort of implications of a kind of morality tale and the magical creature, in this case, the magical coat. And so my reading of the story has been shaped by something completely apart from the story, which makes me wonder what I see in the story. Am I, when we come to any reading experience, are all these things in our minds and influencing, therefore, what we're looking at? And so are we seeing the story itself? Yeah. So it's a kind of grim story. And I think it's definitely handled. Grant and I, before we went on air, we thought maybe it's not our style to be super critical at all. One of my reactions is I wondered if the story was a little bit too long and might have been cut a little bit. But yeah, there's this story about obsessiveness and strains on relationships, and all figured through this, as I see it, or as I experienced it, this folktale, Green Coat. Yeah, there you have it.
Let me jump in before Grant gets in, because I thought you were going very specifically to Nikolai Gogol's The Overcoat. Because when I first saw the title, The Green Coat, that's immediately what popped into my mind, which is a great classic short story by Gogol. And there are some similarities between what happens in this story and what happens in the Gogol story about this sort of lower level bureaucrat who spends more money than he has to spend on this really great coat, but it then impacts his entire life, the way people deal with him, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what originally attracted me to this story. But then as I read it, I did see these parallels. So that your point is a really good one. Everything we read is informed by everything we've read through the years. But yeah, Grant, let me kick it over to you to get some of your
I
thoughts.
was just gonna give Brady that. I thought that was brilliant. I think absolutely. I hadn't thought of it until Brady said it, but I'm gonna piggyback on that. The Ruskies. I definitely see. And the point of view being a bigger point of view. Going in, doing the head hopping thing that the Russian writers do. You don't have to just stick with one. You do that more, that larger POV, and we get Teddy, we get Paul, we get Augusto. So I thought that was right on. But the thing I was bringing to it, the thing that I bring to it is I couldn't help but think of Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. And what is this thing that's being carried, and what is it? It seems to have this allegorical representation thing, and it's somehow there's a hint at mental illness, but I don't know. I almost wish everybody would start doing something like wearing a hat like I do, and forever, or maybe somebody else is into lots of chains and can't take them off. They shower with them. All of society starts carrying these things, but there was something about that struck me as, what is this, and what does it and I couldn't help but think of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Coat when I was reading it. So yeah, I have no answers for what the story means, except I was definitely attracted to the mystery of the ephemera that was before us that I can't get a grasp on. So it's well crafted, and I like the point of view quite a bit. I mean, Richard Russo talked about that. He said, why why are all the stories in literary magazines, first person or limited third? Why do we not see more, omniscient or, multiple perspectives? And he's absolutely right about that. There was a lecture he gave at Warren Wilson College.
Right, right. Yeah. So basically the point of view just shifts, regularly between Paul, the guy who's wearing the coat, and Augusto, his partner, and then Teddy, the next door neighbor, across the hall neighbor. I'd have to go back, but I think it's probably fairly evenly divided in the story. There's a real balance between, the point of view and the number of pages that each character gets or whatever. And again, like you said, I mean, so many times we're taught that we need to be, select a point of view and stick with it. And we of course talked about this in other contexts. One of the things I find interesting about this story too is it's a queer story. I mean, all three characters are gay, and that dynamic is very much a part of what is going on here, and the tension and so forth. But yet, I definitely related to so much that was going on in the story, because I think it's about relationships. It's about human relationships and the particular orientation of the characters. It's important. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean to downplay that. But on the other hand, it doesn't then make it exclusively a story that only someone who's part of the LGBTQ community can relate to. I think anybody who's a human being and who has been, in relationships and the complexities of relationships can read this and really appreciate, what's going on there, and see things that are very familiar in terms of the dynamics of relationships and so forth, right? So it's not exclusive to a very specific demographic in terms of readers who may appreciate what this story is about.
Yeah, it seems like the coat could certainly be read as emblematic of the failing condition of relationships and the shifting ground, and the way some relationships run out of steam or become threadbare. The silk linings become kind of tatty, and yeah, one of the things I like best about this story is it does have a kind of mysterious nature to it. What is going on with, after all, what is going on with Paul, and what is the nature of the relationship, and what does it take to sustain a relationship, and then what happens when one partner perhaps loses interest, or maybe even literally turns their back on the other person. Yeah, so the green coat, emblematic of the vexed nature of relationships and time, right? They seem to be a little worn down by getting older.
Yeah, and I don't know how to say this. I think the trick or the gamble that this story has, and the writer pulls it off. You have a character. The character seems fairly constant. Paul, yes, he's changing as the coat changes, but he keeps no, please take off that stinky coat. No, then he loses his job. Then he's working at the bakery, loses his job, and it's like he keeps saying no. Basically, if we're gonna make love, I'm wearing my coat. Well, then you sleep on the floor, pal. And so that's kind of a risk. Like, where's the change but by the end there is change. So like throughout, the character seems constant, but this coat seems to represent kind of a downhill trajectory for the character. And I know I'm focusing just on the one character, but he's the one that for me was, I don't know why I'm saying this, the most compelling, maybe because of the coat thing, the stubbornness of him, his focus on being steadfast with that. And then the coat kind of, just as nature falls apart, the coat starts falling apart on him. It's beyond his control. It's like it grows a fungus or some damn thing, it starts eating itself, like that's pretty cool. I mean, I think that's a risk as a writer, because you keep having scenes where there's choices the writer can make, where Paul can make a choice, but Paul sort of makes the same choice over and over again. But the the narration keeps escalating. So that's what makes it interesting, because there still is change happening, but the characters kind of, does that make
He
sense?
becomes in some ways the counterpart to the coat.
Yes. Yes. And that's interesting to me.
Well, there's a lot of interesting little tidbits going on in the story. One of the things that stood out to me was this across the hall guy Teddy, and maybe it's just the name that I really I think about this character a lot. But yeah, at one point, the writer gets into this thing that why is Teddy staying in this crappy little efficiency apartment? Why doesn't he? Because it's like near a college campus. I think Teddy's a student, and so when the semester's over, why doesn't Teddy go back home for a few months? And live presumably in a nicer house or have some more amenities or whatever. But we're told that Teddy stays here because he can be himself
Yeah.
here. He can be a gay person, live openly in that way. Whereas when he goes home, he has to put on a different mantle. He has to put on a different coat, so to speak. And he'd rather live in this crappy little apartment and sort of be privy to the tension between these two guys, rather than go home and have to pretend to be someone else. And again, not everybody has that specific dilemma, but I think we all can relate to having to be somewhat different people in different environments and with different people. And sometimes we do make decisions about, well, we're going to avoid them, we're going to avoid that setting because we like who we are here. We don't want to be that person there.
I have a ton of students, because I teach creative writing, and I have a ton of students that have that dilemma every Thanksgiving. They don't want to go back to rural Iowa because it's very conservative. I don't want to overgeneralize, but this is kind of what I've found as a teacher. And they just have to keep their mouths shut and mind their peace because they've become liberalized. They've come to a college campus. They've had their minds expanded. And to go back home and hear their parents supporting Trump and all that kind of stuff, it's hard for them. And some of them have come out and they don't want to go back and have to deal with that and be quoted Leviticus and other things, from the Bible. So that's really real. And I agree with you. I found that to really hit home with my experience as a teacher, knowing so many students who just sort of suck it up and go home, but they would rather stay on campus, I think. But it's sort of expected of them to be home for Thanksgiving.
Right.
Yeah, it's belabor this point, but it's also a story about loneliness.
Mhm.
Teddy wants, he would like, he likes these guys. Like he has dreams of not being on his own, but being in a kind of relationship. And so I think that's pretty powerful
Mhm.
in this story, that his experience, yeah, he gets to live this life and he prefers it certainly to the life that he would have to return to. But he also wants even more than just that, his tiny little room. He sees a kind of family or a kind of greater relationship there too. So yeah, the story in part about loneliness and isolation as Paul becomes rather isolated.
You
Right.
almost wonder 2021, right? Like that's right in the heart of the pandemic, but depends on how long they held on to it before it came out. Because didn't it happened around 2020? I mean, I, I don't that's interesting because loneliness, isolation. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the timing, but of course, some of these journals like Story, I mean, it may be a couple of years before they publish a piece. I know I've run into that a couple of times. Let me get, before I forget, let me give Richard Mirabella's little blurb here. And again, this is a little bit out of date, but it says here for his contributor's note, Richard Mirabella is a civil servant living in upstate New York. His work has appeared in American Short Fiction, Split Lip Magazine, Wigleaf, and elsewhere. His debut novel, Brother and Sister Enter the Forest, will be published in 2023 by Catapult. And he has a website. I think it's richardmirabellawriter.com. It's easily found, even if I don't have the website quite right. And his novel is out and available, and his list of credits is even longer now, etc. one of the things I find interesting about his contributors note is it says he's a civil servant. If you go to his website, he has a little bio, and it's pretty much identical to this, and where he leads with the fact he's a civil servant. And what I find interesting about that is I have so many students, creative writing students, who feel like they have to make a choice. They have to either become a writer, which for them means teaching, writing, becoming an editor, going into publishing, or they're going to do something else. They're going to go to law school. They're going to go here. They're going to go there. And no, that's not true. It doesn't have to be a binary thing. One of my favorite students I've had in this MFA program I've been teaching in for years, she had this kind of crisis, her last semester in the program because she, didn't think she wanted to be a writer. And here she'd spent all this time and money getting her MFA, and she really wanted to be an accountant. And I said, that's not a problem. You can be an accountant who writes great short stories. And I started going through the list of, Sherwood Anderson was an insurance salesman, Charles Bukowski was a postman, on and on and on. A lot of our greatest writers, did other things to put bread on the table. And a lot of people end up writing about things related to their profession. So they have insights into being a lawyer or a doctor or a forensic psychologist or an accountant or whatever it is. And so they can write some really great fiction, write poetry or stage plays or whatever, because they have an understanding of that life that maybe someone who's just an academic, I don't mean just, to diminish it, but in other words, that's the frame of their experience. And so they have, that's why I think in the 20th century, there were so many novels and short stories about writers, because they were being written by writers who that's all they did were writers, so I'm kind of seeing some nods out there. So I really encourage my students who want to be other things in life to realize they don't have to just be, an accountant or a lawyer or a school teacher or a nurse who doesn't write. They can be that and write. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Brady, do you run into a lot of MFA students in Missoula who are maybe kind of at that crossroads to some degree, or?
Oh, I think I mean, no doubt that's true. I think the ethic of the program, the kind of ethos of the place, is that folks are pretty focused on being writers. That is their aspiration. But even just taking a look at the bio above Richards in this edition of Story, Barbara Locke is an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Columbia University Irvine Medical Center. Yeah, right on. Writing fiction and an emergency doc and professor. Yeah, awesome. I think that's great. Yeah, what did Wallace Stevens do? Yeah.
That strange little story we read a couple episodes ago about the escaped Egyptian princess. That author was it was in law school at UCLA, as we were talking about her story and so forth, but yet she published several really experimental, pieces in several different journals. And I hope she, as a lawyer, she's going to continue to write and publish, that kind of stuff or whatever kind of stuff she wants to. But yeah, Grant, what's your experience with students who are making those decisions about writing versus not, and other kind of professions, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, the message I always give is you can always be a writer. You just got to, carve out the time. So it's a lot of students. There is a kind of, academia is very appealing lifestyle. You get a lot of free time in the summers and all that kind of stuff, but jobs keep getting more and more scarce. So one of the things we've tried to do at North American Review is to have a practicum class, and people develop editorial skills, working with writers, working with platforms like InDesign and Drupal and that sort of stuff. So we've helped student writers end up getting jobs in publishing, working as editors, copy editors, and that sort of thing. So they have a practical thing to go along with the creative thing. But I mean, my middle daughter's a hell of a writer, and she works at a care facility. She uses her training in psychology undergrad that she You know, she didn't get a degree in English lit. She got it in gender studies and psychology, and she's putting that to use to put food on the table. But she's a writer. So yeah, I mean, I encourage writing's it's like learning certain sports like golf that you can play when you're in your 60s. I mean, it's a carryover skill. It shouldn't end with the workshop. And you can always keep doing it no matter what you do, is my feeling. I just happen to
Right.
be lucky that I'm a teacher of creative writing and get to write at the same time. So I feel blessed in that regard. But like a lot of my, not a lot, but I've been in touch with a few of my students from the last 10 years and they're still writing. And so that to me is a credit to them and to the program.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we probably are at a point where we want to kind of wrap things up a little bit. Um, so we'll be working on our various things. I know, Grant, you love summer because you can devote yourself more fully to writing, and Brady, I know you feel that you have been liberated from your stint in the administration for a semester. So what are
Yeah,
what are
no,
some of your immediate plans, guys? Brady, you're kind of shaking your head. What do you got going on in the near future here?
no, I'm chair until the end of August. So yeah, the
Oh,
bloodletting continues. You know,
sorry about that. But Grant, you get to write pretty exclusively in the summertime. Do you
I,
know?
and it's funny, the way the universe works, like the story we happen to have to read for today is exactly what I'm trying to do in terms of point of view. I just finished a story, a crime story with three different points of view, and each of the characters has about equal time, but it's like one voice is a little Faulknerian, once a bitch, always a bitch. I mean, there's a little bit of that attitude from Sound the Fury and one of the criminal types, and the other one is so I took Eddie Sands, a character of mine, and it's all in limited third, but I slide into these different voices, even though it's a series of limited thirds, and it's just been liberating. I mean, I can I can head hop. I can do what I want. Yeah, so I'm really excited. I'm going to try to write a few more stories of this sort this summer, just because. Well, I read Charles Ardai's collection. I think it's called Death Comes Too Late, and several of his stories had these bigger points of view, and I was like inspired by that. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this. Why not? And so that's what I'm doing, and it's been a hoot so far.
Very cool. So, Brady, are you getting any time for creative writing, or is that pretty much? I know we've got about a third of your novel typeset, and we've been working on proofreading that, and I need to get back to the other two-thirds of it. So I know that's been occupying some of your time, working on those proof sheets and so forth. But what else is
yeah,
going on creatively?
yeah. So one of my responsibilities is as chair is seeing through our I think it's every seventh year program review, and so pulling together that document. So the minute I can pass that up the food chain, then I have all these projects on my lists of the work I want to get done. So I'm just counting the days and
How
putting in
far
the
are you?
hours.
How far are you along on that Bob Dylan project? It sounds like that's getting close.
Yeah, we've already reviewed all the page proofs. So whenever we agree that the proofs are set, then the index will be done, and then it's just a matter of when they'll make the physical objects. So yeah, so
You,
it would be nice to, yeah. And then so my big ambition, is Ted knows, I gave him a shout out the other day. Yeah, I want to see a journey to Al Ramal through the production stages. It's way past time for that one. So get the Dylan book done, get a journey done, and then all these new things that I want to get to. Yeah,
you farm
one thing
out
at a time.
you farm out the index, or do you do that yourselves?
No, for this one we let the press hire a gun, or got the press to hire a gunslinger for us.
Good cheers. Good cheers, as they say in Brooklyn. Hey, give a shout out to Barry for me. I miss him. Give him a big hello for me. I still think back to the days we used to do those radio shows. Him and me, you, Craig Fisher, David Rachels. It was a blast. So
Yeah,
anyway.
those are great. Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for carving out some time to do this episode. I'll do my thing and get it uploaded to YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts, etc. And I look forward to working with you guys individually as we work on other stuff. And thanks to our listeners and viewers for tuning in. So I'm going to hit the old stop record button here, and I appreciate everyone giving us a listen.